course, like most of Husker Nation, maybe could be feeling a little bit better this week. But onward and upward, right? We got to look forward to the future and not maybe what could have been. Any final thoughts on Dylan Raiola in picking Georgia? It looked like everything was kind of leading that way, and then Dylan. I think if anything of interesting about it is the timing, deciding to go ahead and pull the trigger now.
Well, I think Nebraska fans obviously felt good, in that February, March time frame where he had visited a couple times in 3 weeks. And rightly so. I mean, I think I was even kind of going, wow, that this could really be happening. Like things could really have turned over, from the Ohio State decommitment, Matt Rule coming to Lincoln, maybe some things are really, really starting to happen. And then things went really sideways. I think that, he kind of shut it down. There's a lot of speculation, obviously, that he was getting closer to a commitment. His timing, although a little, maybe a little early, is really pretty much in line though still where I felt like it needed to happen. He kept saying July, August, and that made no sense because wherever he was going to go, whether it was USC, Nebraska, Georgia, wherever, you would have rather he committed, in that May time frame, if not like early July, because you really want to capitalize on that so you can like close out the rest of your class. You want to grab all the high level guys and bring them all in and say, look what we got. We got the number one quarterback in the country, maybe the number one player overall. Go ahead and sign up here, get into the class because we're going to be filling up really, really quick. And that was absolutely necessary for him to do. The timing that he had originally mentioned made no sense, none. And so this is a little bit more in line with what we were thinking. I think it's a positive for Nebraska, at least that he came off the board a little bit early. If they did want to kind of go back out there and take a look for some 2024 guys, I think the big pivot here is obviously, does Nebraska feel like, they have the number two guy, not only just the number one guy, but the number two guy in the current room? And if they feel like they do, then I think they need to go after a 2024 quarterback. And if they don't, then maybe you see them go back into the portal and take a look. And things really get kind of weird with 2024 quarterbacks if you can kind of think about this just a little bit. If you put them into kind of a cycle where you're looking at October, November, December, and you start hearing rumblings about, well, that head coach is going to get fired. A lot of times those classes fall apart. So if you're kind of thinking that there'll be a second market down the road a little ways, you're probably right. And I think that there's a bit of a second market already when you go out to like the top 100 teams or the top 100 quarterbacks that are out there, based on 3. There's only like 25 guys that aren't committed in that whole list. But there are a lot of guys that are committed, along with another quarterback that's in the top 100 to the same school. And I think that that's an interesting, possibility too to approach a guy. So it's going to be fun to see what Nebraska does in the quarterback position because the 2024 class, if they take a guy, it means that they feel good about the room, and if they do portal or don't do anything else about it, it could mean could mean like that they need another guy, somewhere else down the line. The portal guy would definitely be interesting because it means that they're looking for somebody else to kind of take that pressure off of them if Sims were to get hurt or something like that during the season.
So you mentioned the recruiting side of it and Georgia or just wrapping up the recruitment with Dylan Raiola and using that momentum to fill the rest of your class.
Yep.
Where does Nebraska go from here with not getting Dylan Raiola's commitment and a guy like, not saying that he's going with him or that he's a package deal, but a guy like Ryan Wingo, who has kind of been kind of been rumored to be going wherever Dylan ended up committing. A guy like Brandon Baker, who, although even without Dylan coming, has visited Nebraska multiple times. Where does Nebraska go in terms of getting some more of that high-level talent in the 2024 class without the commitment of Raiola?
Well, I mean, Wingo told me specifically that he and Raiola are talking. I mean, they have taken visits to the same school on the same season. That's not a coincidence. They're scheduling that. They are all that to happen. Wingo's going to be a bulldog. Just wait and see. What's going to be really interesting are the other guys that you mentioned, Baker, Nathaniel Frazier, and Ethan Breland. Where do you see that now with Dylan Williams and Mathuti and where are the other guys at in California? Like, where's their headspace at now that Raiola is not going to Nebraska? And honestly, I would say, like with Brandon Baker, that was a guy that was, pretty adamant, around the spring game and even before that, he was coming back for an official visit. Now, how does that get kind of impacted? I'll even go one further. You got an in-state guy that's got a Georgia offer, and he's been communicating with Raiola. So it's, you got Carter Nelson out there in Ainsworth, and it's going to be really interesting, obviously, what happens there with him. And Nebraska has at least one tight end, in the class already. Maybe there's a reaction there too with him, but I think that Georgia probably stands maybe to get Riddell, obviously the tight end out of Missouri as well. So I think things are going to get interesting. We're talking about a lot of new names, here in the last couple of weeks with guys making their way onto the official visitor list in the month of June. Guys, these are guys that we were not talking about in March and April. These are guys now. I don't think that they're necessarily on to like Plan B, but I think that Nebraska certainly wanted to put their best foot forward on the Plan A guys, the Brelands and the Bakers and so on. But I think that Nebraska's had a bigger plan kind of in place where, you had to kind of get things going with those 5-star number one type players at their position. And then you had to be really ready to kind of, get the kind of class I think that we would all kind of expect, for a 4-8 team to kind of go ahead and gather and find those kind of hidden gems, the guys that you really feel like you can bring in and develop. And I think a lot of these guys, obviously after Nebraska's offered, like Cole Eccles, great example. They have just skyrocketed. I think Nebraska offers Eccles. He picks up Houston and Texas A&M like within hours of the Nebraska offer. So I think Nebraska's doing a really good job on their evaluation. I think they've done an excellent job on their recruiting up to this point. They just need to get some of those. They need to have some success on the field to lure those bigger name guys to get them in the class to feel better about what the trajectory is of that current team in the program.
Now, people do continue to ask this, so I wanted to ask you this as well. Is it all but done with Daniel Kalen? I know he committed to Missouri. Will there be any chance to reach back into that?
I don't know for sure. If I were to guess, I'm going to say it's done. And I think it's because of the way that Kalen went about, his process. He didn't want to be second fiddle to Dylan Raiola in Nebraska's class. I mean, and I think everybody knew that was what was happening there. So what does he do? He decides to go ahead and circumvent the whole thing. Raiola's not going to commit until May, June, July, August, sometime in the summertime or close to the end of the school year. Kalen takes advantage of the offers that are there, even prior to the evaluation period, prior to where more schools could have gotten out and really he could have taken off a little bit. I mean, as other guys are kind of coming off the board, like I said, there's a high number of top 100 quarterbacks that are off the board. It's going to increase the value of any guy that's not committed in that top 100 kind of list. But Kalen didn't even wait for that. Kalen had the offer that he felt like he needed or wanted to kind of go ahead and consider, like he could make that decision. And I think I really kind of applaud him. I really kind of applaud him for going through the process the way that he did, because it shows such great maturity. It shows that you feel confident with the information at hand, that you're not going to wait around and pick up a late kind of spot in the Nebraska class because Nebraska didn't get what they wanted, but they're going to get then Kalen. It just didn't paint like a great picture. And for that reason, I think Daniel probably stays with his commitment to Missouri.
Now, June usually a big recruiting month for Nebraska. I know they've got some official visitors coming in, that, like you mentioned earlier. What are kind of some of those names? And is there like a specific? I know sometimes they have like a big weekend. Is there a particular weekend they're looking at?
Yeah, I think it was Matt Rule a week ago who had mentioned in a Lincoln City of Commerce presentation that they were kind of setting up around a later date, in the month of June, that would be like their kind of more banner weekend. Typically a the schools all try to say like, hey, the first weekend out of the month of June, we're gonna call that like the top, the top target kind of weekend. Like I have talked to many players that are going to school that first weekend, and they said, yeah, I'm going to their top target weekend official visit or whatever. The problem with that is that if you're dealing with 3 stars, 4 stars, or even 5-star guys, there are several teams around the country that want to have that top target kind of weekend, and these guys are stuck, picking and choosing. So Nebraska would have been able to support, something like a top target weekend, but they also would have lost out because a lot of guys, I think, would have chosen to go to other schools and visited there. And you don't want that to kind of play out there in that space where it can kind of draw criticism or anything like that. In fact, what you do is you set up around a later date, which is what Nebraska's doing. I think it's going to be the 23rd. I think the 16th is going to have some size more similar to like what the other schools around the country are expecting that first weekend in June. But we already know about 7 guys coming in for that weekend for the 23rd. I think we have 4 or 5. Actually, only 2 for the 16th now. There's 4 of them coming in the first weekend in June, which is still a good weekend, just not the 23rd kind of weekend yet. And I think Nebraska is doing the right thing here. I think I've seen it both ways to where you want to set a solid tone, and really come out and impress a recruit with the first visit. So you want them to visit Nebraska first, so they're thinking about Nebraska first. But then I've also seen it more often than not, kind of come back and haunt Nebraska because it's always like the latest official visit is the most, fresh in the memory and the one that obviously that they're talking about the most because they got guys like me that want to call them up and talk about it over and over again. So I really see some good, thought process here around wanting to move that date back in the month of June.
Yeah, that's certainly interesting stuff. The one final thing I wanted to get to, of course, Teddy Rizak committed to Notre Dame the day after getting a Nebraska offer. With him, maybe you can touch on him a little bit specifically, but overall, I think that it's kind of interesting, just in-state recruiting and Matt Rule in this staff. This is a great in-state year where a lot of guys have a lot of different offers, but is it fair yet to this staff to kind of hold it against them if they don't get some of the in-state kids?
Great point. So first of all, Rizak, tremendous athlete. I think he's gonna be a fantastic Division I player. His brother's gonna be a good Division I player too. There's 9 guys in the state of Nebraska that picked up Division I offers. When we talked about like that banner year for Division I talent, I think we really thought that last year was a spectacular year, and it was. I think this year you got a better headliner, in Carter Nelson. I think just kind of across the board and where he's kind of at with his offers, and the teams that are going up to Ainsworth to check out, a tight end. And you've got obviously the wide receivers in Omaha. Keelan's already off the board, and Penning, and so on and so on. But I think that it's really indicative that the talent, I think, is obviously on the rise in the state of Nebraska. I think some of that has to do with 7-on-7 and that is all fantastic. But when these guys, now like there were very few of them outside of like Ashton Murphy that really made their way over, and I'd say probably to a lesser extent as Emmett Morris because he kind of came over to Lincoln kind of out of the blue too. But like Davon Hall hasn't been over to Lincoln once since Matt Rule has become the head coach. And some of these guys have been coming through, far and few between, like maybe once, maybe twice through the spring. Not really the typical kind of Nebraska thing, like, hey, you got an open door, like all the time, anytime you want to. There hasn't been a lot of like get back as often as they kind of can kind of things, and that's maybe picking on their personal schedules a little bit. But I think it's also indicative of just, where they're at with Nebraska as part of their process too. I don't think it reflects negatively on Rule. Everything I've heard is positive around Rule. I think that just these guys aren't really familiar with Nebraska being a successful program, and that's going to take some winning to change the hearts and minds a little bit. Unfortunately for these guys, though, you've got to kind of still show anyway that you're on your way back. And yeah, it's tough to do when you've gone 4-8, and now you got change of the head coach. You got to kind of focus on the positives right now, and that's obviously gonna impact the way that this year is gonna go recruiting wise.
Excellent stuff once again from Bryan Munson, Husker Online in on 3. Thanks again for joining us and breaking it down.
We'll talk next week, guys. We'll see you.